Lafayette Green Poole did not look like a legend when the war began. He was tall, lean, quiet, and unassuming, with the posture of a man who preferred listening to talking. Born in Texas in 1919 and raised during the Great Depression, Poole came of age in a world where toughness was learned early, and talking about it was considered unnecessary. When the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, Poole was already determined to serve, not out of a desire for glory, but because the war had come whether anyone liked it or not. He joined the U.S. Army and trained as a tanker, eventually finding his place inside the cramped steel hull of an M4 Sherman tank. At the time, the Sherman was the backbone of American armored forces, reliable and mechanically sound, but already developing a reputation as being outgunned by German armor. Poole would turn that supposedly inferior tank into one of the deadliest weapons on the Western Front. By 1944, the Allied invasion of Europe had begun in earnest, and armored warfare had become a brutal contest of speed, nerve, and tactical awareness. Poole was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division, nicknamed Spearhead, a unit that would spend months fighting its way through France, Belgium, and into the heart of Germany itself. Poole became a tank commander, responsible not only for maneuvering his vehicle in combat, but for keeping his crew alive while making split-second decisions under fire. His tank, famously nicknamed "In the Mood," would become feared by German forces and legendary among American crews. The nickname came from the popular Glenn Miller song, but there was nothing playful about what followed. Unlike many tank commanders who relied strictly on doctrine, Poole developed an aggressive, predatory style of fighting that bordered on reckless, but it worked. He understood the strengths and weaknesses of both his own tank and the enemy's. German Panthers and Tigers had heavier armor and more powerful guns, but they were slower to traverse their turrets and often less flexible in tight terrain. Poole exploited this mercilessly. He hunted German tanks at close range, flanking them, ambushing them from concealment, and firing first, often at distances so short that survival depended on milliseconds. He preferred to move fast, strike hard, and never stay in one place long enough for German anti-tank crews to get a fix on him. What separated Poole from many of his peers was not just his aggression, but his uncanny battlefield awareness. He had an instinct for reading terrain, spotting ambushes before they were sprung, and anticipating enemy movements. Fellow tankers later recalled that Poole seemed to sense danger before it appeared, ordering sudden course changes or halts moments before German shells slammed into the ground where they would have been. His gunnery was precise and ruthless. Targets were not engaged casually. Once Poole decided to fire, he intended to destroy whatever was in front of him completely. During the breakout from Normandy following Operation Cobra, Poole's kill count began to rise rapidly. German forces, already battered by Allied air power, were attempting desperate counterattacks using whatever armor they could scrape together. Poole's Sherman spearheaded advances through hedgerows, villages, and road junctions where German tanks lay in wait. In one engagement after another, "In the Mood" knocked out Panthers, Panzer IVs, self-propelled guns, half-tracks, and anti-tank positions. The pace was relentless. Poole often fought multiple engagements in a single day, moving so quickly that German units had little time to react before being destroyed. As the division pushed deeper into France, Poole's reputation spread. German prisoners reportedly warned others about an American tank commander who attacked without hesitation and seemed impossible to stop. American infantry, seeing Poole's tank appear at critical moments, began to rely on him as an armored sledgehammer capable of breaking open stubborn defenses. He was not loud or boastful, and he never celebrated kills. When asked later about his success, Poole simply said he was doing his job. But the numbers spoke for themselves. In just a few months of combat, his tank crew destroyed more enemy vehicles than many entire armored companies. What made Poole truly dangerous was his willingness to take calculated risks that others avoided. Where doctrine advised caution, Poole saw opportunity. He frequently advanced ahead of friendly units, probing enemy lines, drawing fire, and revealing German positions that could then be destroyed. This forward-leaning posture was not reckless bravado. It was informed by experience and confidence in his crew. His gunner trusted his commands. His driver knew when to push hard and when to pull back. Inside the tank, communication was fast, clipped, and deadly efficient. By late summer 1944, Poole's kill tally was staggering. German armor losses attributed to his crew climbed into the dozens. Entire enemy positions collapsed under his assaults. Yet the danger increased with every success. German forces began prioritizing anti-tank defenses specifically against advancing Shermans, laying ambushes with Panzerfausts and heavy guns. Every village became a potential death trap. Poole understood that survival was never guaranteed, no matter how skilled you were. Still, he pressed forward. The brutality of armored combat left little room for reflection. Tanks burned with crews trapped inside. Ammunition detonated violently. Survivors were rare. Poole witnessed this again, and it hardened him. But it never turned him cruel. His focus remained singular: destroy the enemy before they destroy you. The emotional toll was buried deep, compartmentalized behind discipline and momentum. There was no time to grieve in the middle of a campaign that moved at breakneck speed. As the Allied advance continued toward Germany's borders, Poole's legend only grew. He was no longer just another tank commander. He had become a symbol of American armored dominance during a period when German forces were still capable of lethal resistance. Yet even legends have limits. The war had not finished extracting its price, and Poole's run of near-impossible survival was approaching its breaking point. The same aggression that made him deadly would soon place him in a situation where skill alone would not be enough. And when that moment came, it would end the career of the most feared tanker in the U.S. Army, not with defeat, but with a reminder that no one, no matter how unstoppable they seem, is immune to the chaos of war. By the summer of 1944, Lafayette Poole had already survived something most American tankers never did. He had lived through multiple full-scale armored engagements and was still fighting. Assigned to Company I, 32nd Armored Regiment of the 3rd Armored Division, Poole was now commanding an M4 Sherman tank named in the Mood, a name that would soon become legendary among U.S. armored units in Europe. The tank was not especially remarkable in design. Standard Sherman armor, a 75mm gun, and the same vulnerabilities shared by every American tank crew, but the crew inside it was anything but ordinary. Poole understood the realities of armored warfare better than most officers twice his age. He knew the Sherman was outgunned by German Panthers and Tigers, and he knew that a single mistake could kill everyone inside. Instead of relying on frontal engagements, Poole emphasized speed, surprise, and aggressive maneuvering. He believed that hesitation killed crews, and that attacking first, often violently and without warning, gave American tanks a chance to survive against superior German armor. This mindset would define his actions across France and into Germany. The breakout from Normandy following Operation Cobra transformed the battlefield. The static hedgerow fighting gave way to mobile warfare, and this was where Poole thrived. As German forces began retreating eastward, American armored units pushed rapidly across northern France, encountering disorganized resistance mixed with sudden, deadly counterattacks. Poole's tank was often at the front of these advances, pushing ahead of infantry and probing enemy positions at close range. When German units attempted to ambush advancing columns, Poole responded with overwhelming aggression, firing first and continuing to advance even under heavy fire. In one engagement near Chartres, Poole's tank encountered a German column attempting to reposition under cover of darkness. Rather than waiting for orders, Poole ordered his gunner to open fire immediately. The result was devastating. German vehicles were destroyed before they could disperse, and the sudden violence shattered what little cohesion the enemy unit had left. This pattern repeated itself throughout August and September of 1944. Poole did not wait for permission to engage when an opportunity presented itself. He acted, and his crew followed without hesitation. What set Poole apart was not recklessness, but confidence built on instinct and experience. He rarely engaged German heavy tanks head-on unless he had no other choice. Instead, he maneuvered aggressively to strike from the flank or rear, often closing to dangerously short ranges where the Sherman's gun could penetrate weaker armor. His tank crew learned to move as a single organism. Loader, gunner, driver, and radio operator reacted instantly to Poole's commands, executing rapid fire and repositioning before the enemy could respond effectively. By early September, Poole's tally of destroyed enemy vehicles had grown to levels almost unheard of for a single tank commander. German tanks, self-propelled guns, armored cars, half-tracks, and trucks fell to his crew in rapid succession. He also destroyed artillery positions, infantry strongpoints, and supply columns. Poole did not count kills during battle. He focused on survival and momentum. But after-action reports began to reveal the scale of his effectiveness. His name started circulating among American armored units as someone who could be relied upon to break through resistance where others stalled. The psychological impact of Poole's actions extended beyond raw destruction. German units facing elements of the 3rd Armored Division began reporting encounters with American tanks that attacked aggressively and refused to disengage. These reports often described fast-moving Shermans that appeared unexpectedly, fired accurately, and withdrew before counterfire could be organized. While Poole was not the only tanker employing such tactics, he became one of their most effective practitioners. As American forces approached the German border, resistance stiffened. The Wehrmacht, reinforced by SS units and remnants of armored divisions, prepared defensive lines in forests, villages, and road junctions. This environment increased the danger for tank crews exponentially. Narrow roads, limited visibility, and concealed anti-tank guns turned every advance into a potential ambush. Poole adapted by pushing even harder. He believed stopping gave the enemy time to aim. In one notable action during the fighting near Mons, Poole's tank encountered a concealed German anti-tank gun that destroyed another Sherman in the column. Instead of withdrawing, Poole immediately ordered his driver forward, advancing directly into the kill zone while firing continuously. His gunner destroyed the anti-tank position at close range, preventing further losses. The decision was risky, but it reflected Poole's philosophy: Decisive violence reduced prolonged exposure. Despite his growing reputation, Poole remained personally detached from his own legend. Fellow crewmen later recalled that he rarely spoke about his accomplishments and never exaggerated what he had done. He treated each engagement as another problem to solve, another obstacle to push through. He was aware of the risks, but he accepted them as unavoidable. Tank warfare offered no margin for caution. It demanded commitment. By late September 1944, Poole had destroyed more enemy vehicles than any other American tanker in the European theater. Estimates vary, but conservative counts credit him with at least 12 confirmed enemy tanks destroyed, along with dozens of other armored and soft-skinned vehicles. His actions contributed directly to the rapid collapse of German defensive positions during the Allied advance. Yet even as his kill count rose, so did the danger. German forces increasingly targeted aggressive American tank commanders, and Poole's unit often found itself under heavy artillery and anti-tank fire. The reality of armored warfare eventually caught up to him. On September 19, 1944, near Münsterbusch in Germany, Poole's tank was struck by enemy fire during a chaotic engagement. The impact did not destroy the tank, but it severely wounded Poole. Shrapnel and concussive force left him badly injured, and he was evacuated from the battlefield. The war for Lafayette Poole was over, not because of fear or exhaustion, but because his body could no longer continue. His removal from combat marked the end of one of the most extraordinary individual records in armored warfare history. Poole had fought continuously for 81 days in frontline tank combat, an almost unheard of duration given the average lifespan of tank crews in heavy fighting. He survived battles that destroyed dozens of other tanks and emerged as the most effective American tank commander of World War II. Poole would never return to combat. His wounds ended his frontline service, and he was eventually sent home. The tank in the Mood would be destroyed shortly after his departure, a reminder of how thin the margin between survival and death truly was. Yet Poole's influence lived on in the tactics adopted by other tank crews, many of whom studied his aggressiveness and willingness to seize initiative under fire. His story was not widely publicized during the war. There were no movie deals, no carefully managed propaganda campaigns built around his image. He was simply a tanker who did his job with unmatched effectiveness and walked away when his body could no longer carry him forward. In the chaos of Europe's battlefields, Lafayette Poole became something rare, a survivor whose aggression saved lives, shattered enemy formations, and helped push the war toward its conclusion. By the time American armored units finally broke out of Normandy in late July 1944, Lafayette Poole had already survived what most tankers never did: weeks of combat in the worst possible terrain against a desperate and highly skilled enemy. The hedgerows of Normandy had turned the battlefield into a maze of death, where tanks were ambushed at point-blank range, infantry hid with Panzerfausts behind earthen walls, and every advance felt like a gamble with fate. Poole had learned quickly that survival depended on aggression, instinct, and the willingness to strike first. As the Allies pushed toward the French interior during Operation Cobra, the nature of the fighting changed dramatically, and Poole's reputation exploded. Once the American breakout began, German defenses collapsed unevenly. Some units disintegrated, while others fought ferociously in isolated pockets. This chaotic phase favored tank commanders who could think independently, move fast, and exploit opportunities without waiting for orders. Poole thrived in this environment. He pushed his Sherman aggressively forward, often advancing ahead of supporting units, trusting his crew and his own judgment. Where other commanders hesitated, Poole attacked. Where others slowed to assess threats, he charged directly into them, believing that hesitation was more dangerous than action. It was during this rapid advance across France that Poole's kill count soared. German columns retreating along roads became targets of opportunity. Poole's Sherman smashed convoys of trucks, artillery, and half-tracks, firing point-blank into packed formations before the enemy could react. In one engagement, his tank rolled directly into a German road column and destroyed dozens of vehicles in minutes, setting the road ablaze with burning fuel, ammunition, and wreckage. The speed of the attack left German survivors stunned and disorganized, unable to mount a coherent defense. Tank-on-tank combat during this phase was brutal and unforgiving. Contrary to popular myth, Sherman crews were not helpless against German armor when properly employed. Poole understood that frontal duels favored panthers and tigers, so he avoided them whenever possible. Instead, he flanked, ambushed, and attacked from unexpected angles. He coordinated closely with infantry, used terrain intelligently, and relied on speed rather than brute force. When German tanks appeared, Poole maneuvered relentlessly, seeking side shots, rear armor, or moments when the enemy was distracted or repositioning. Several encounters during August 1944 cemented Poole's legend. In one engagement, his Sherman surprised a group of German tanks moving through a village. Poole fired first, knocking out the lead vehicle, then rapidly shifted targets, disabling a second before the enemy could respond effectively. The remaining German tanks withdrew, unwilling to face what they believed was a larger American armored force. In reality, it was often just Poole's tank and a handful of others exploiting fear and confusion. Poole's crew played a critical role in these successes. Gunner Clarence Ski Henson was exceptionally fast and accurate, often landing the first shot before German crews could traverse their guns. Driver Wilbert Schoolboy Smith maneuvered the Sherman with precision, keeping it moving even under intense fire. Loader Delbert Jailbird Boggs worked tirelessly, feeding rounds into the breach under exhausting conditions. Poole trusted his men completely, and that trust translated into deadly efficiency. They were not just a tank crew, they were a fighting organism, each member anticipating the other's actions almost instinctively. As Poole's victories mounted, German forces began to treat American Shermans with increased caution, especially when encountering lone or aggressive tanks. German intelligence reports and field communications warned of American armored units that attacked with unusual speed and confidence. While Poole's name was not necessarily known personally to every German crew, his actions contributed to a growing sense that American armor was no longer the disorganized, inferior force it had once been considered. This psychological shift mattered. Confidence on the battlefield often proved as decisive as firepower. The deeper Poole pushed into France, the more dangerous his missions became. German rearguard actions were unpredictable, and even retreating units could turn deadly in moments. Roadside ambushes, concealed anti-tank guns, and sudden counterattacks remained constant threats. Poole survived several near misses that should have ended his war. His tank was hit multiple times, shaken by explosions, sprayed with shrapnel, and scarred by close calls that left deep gouges in its armor. Each time, Poole emerged uninjured, seemingly immune to the chaos around him. His leadership style also evolved during this period. Poole was not reckless, despite appearances. He calculated risks carefully and understood when to press an attack and when to disengage. He encouraged initiative among his crew and subordinate tank commanders, allowing them freedom to act rather than enforcing rigid command structures. This flexibility allowed his unit to respond rapidly to changing conditions and exploit German weaknesses before they could be reinforced. As American forces approached Paris and continued eastward, Poole's tally of destroyed enemy vehicles reached staggering levels. Estimates vary, but by late summer 1944, he had personally accounted for dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, along with hundreds of other enemy assets. These numbers were not inflated propaganda. They were documented through after-action reports, crew testimony, and battlefield confirmations. Few American tank commanders in World War II achieved anything close to Poole's record. Yet despite his success, Poole remained relatively unknown outside his unit. He did not seek publicity, nor did he fit the image of a polished war hero. He was rough-spoken, blunt, and uninterested in ceremony. His focus remained entirely on keeping his crew alive and destroying the enemy. This lack of self-promotion would later contribute to his story being overshadowed by more cinematic or officially celebrated figures. As the Allied advance accelerated toward Germany's borders, the nature of combat once again began to change. German resistance stiffened in certain areas, and the Wehrmacht deployed more experienced armored units to slow the Allied momentum. Poole sensed that the war was entering a new phase, one where the easy victories of the breakout would give way to harder, bloodier fighting. Still, he pressed forward, confident that his experience and instincts would carry him through whatever lay ahead. He could not have known that his war was nearing its end, not through defeat or enemy fire, but through a moment of sheer bad luck that would remove one of America's deadliest tank commanders from the battlefield forever. By the autumn of 1944, Lafayette Poole had become something rare on the Western Front, a tanker whose name was known far beyond his own platoon. Inside the 3rd Armored Division, stories about Poole's crew circulated almost like battlefield folklore. Infantrymen spoke about Shermans that appeared out of fog and hedgerows and simply erased German positions. Junior tankers studied his tactics closely, even if they never served under him. Poole himself never encouraged the reputation. He remained quiet, professional, and intensely focused on the next mission. For him, survival depended not on glory, but on constant vigilance and an aggressive mindset that never allowed the enemy the initiative. The tempo of operations during the breakout from Normandy and the race across France had hardened Poole and his crew into a perfectly synchronized fighting unit. Poole commanded his tank with instinctive precision, often positioning his Sherman slightly ahead of the formation to draw enemy fire, trusting his crew's speed and coordination to respond instantly. Gunner Clarence Smoyer later recalled that Poole's commands were always calm and clear, even under fire. There was no shouting, no panic. Poole knew that hesitation meant death, and he drilled his crew relentlessly to ensure that every movement inside the tank was automatic. Loader Willis Odell could slam a shell home in seconds. Driver Charles Bales maneuvered the tank through shellfire as if navigating a narrow alley back home. As the division pushed toward the German border, resistance stiffened dramatically. The Germans were no longer retreating in disorder. They were fighting from prepared positions, reinforced with anti-tank guns, Panzerfaust teams, and remaining armored reserves. In Lorraine and the approaches to the Siegfried Line, fogged, rain, and rolling terrain created ideal conditions for ambush. These were the kinds of environments where Sherman crews suffered their heaviest losses. Yet Poole's effectiveness continued. He adapted quickly, changing tactics to match the battlefield. He began using short, violent thrusts rather than long advances, smashing enemy strongpoints and immediately relocating before German gunners could react. During this phase, Poole's kill count grew rapidly. German tanks, self-propelled guns, half-tracks, and anti-tank positions fell to his gun in rapid succession. His Sherman, already scarred with battle damage, became a symbol of reliability to the infantry units that often advanced alongside him. Soldiers trusted that when Poole's tank was nearby, German armor would not be. His crew developed an almost uncanny ability to detect threats before they revealed themselves. A suspicious tree line, an unnatural mound of earth, a glint of metal through mist. These details often meant the difference between firing first or being destroyed. Despite his success, Poole remained acutely aware of how thin the margin for survival was. He had seen too many experienced tankers killed by a single well-placed shot or a hidden Panzerfaust. He refused to linger unnecessarily, even after successful engagements. Once a target was destroyed, he repositioned immediately. This constant movement frustrated German attempts to zero in on his tank and likely saved his crew's lives dozens of times. It was not bravado that kept Poole alive, but discipline and an almost obsessive caution layered on top of aggression. The German counteroffensive capabilities during this period were still formidable. Units from elite formations, including elements of panzer divisions and Waffen-SS units, attempted to blunt the American advance. In several engagements, Poole found himself facing German armor that technically outmatched his Sherman in firepower and frontal armor. Yet he compensated through positioning and timing, often striking from the flank or rear, where even the most formidable German tanks were vulnerable. Poole understood that a Sherman could not win a frontal duel against a Panther or Tiger, but he also understood that tanks rarely fought in textbook conditions. Terrain, surprise, and coordination mattered more than raw specifications. As the 3rd Armored Division continued eastward, Poole's reputation reached higher command levels. Officers took note of his performance, though Poole himself never sought recognition. He remained focused on keeping his crew alive and accomplishing the mission. The psychological toll of constant combat, however, was unavoidable. Long days of tension, interrupted by moments of extreme violence, wore down even the most resilient soldiers. Poole masked this strain behind professionalism, but those close to him later noted that he rarely relaxed, even in rear areas. He slept lightly and remained alert, fully aware that the front could shift without warning. The defining moment of Poole's combat career came abruptly and without drama. On September 19, 1944, near Münsterbusch in Germany, Poole was riding outside his tank, a common practice among tank commanders to maintain better situational awareness. German artillery or mortar fire suddenly bracketed the area. One shell exploded nearby, and a fragment struck Poole in the foot. The wound was severe enough to end his frontline service immediately. He was evacuated under fire, his war as a tank commander ending not in a blazing duel, but in the sudden, impersonal violence of indirect fire. The irony was stark. After surviving countless close-range engagements with German armor and anti-tank weapons, Poole was removed from the battlefield by a random fragment. His crew survived, but the team that had become inseparable was broken apart. Poole was sent to a hospital, and his tank was reassigned. The division continued its advance, but one of its most lethal weapons was gone. By the time Poole left the front, his confirmed record stood at an extraordinary level. In just 81 days of combat, his crew had destroyed at least 258 enemy vehicles, including dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, as well as hundreds of other targets such as trucks, artillery pieces, and fortified positions. Few tank commanders in any army achieved comparable results in such a short time. Yet Poole himself showed little interest in the numbers. He rarely spoke about his accomplishments and resisted efforts to turn him into a propaganda figure. His injury marked the end of his direct contribution to the war, but not the end of his influence. The lessons learned from Poole's methods, aggression balanced with caution, constant movement, crew discipline, and tactical awareness, became part of the institutional memory of American armored warfare. While newer tanks and doctrines would eventually replace the Sherman, the human factors that defined Poole's success remained timeless. As the war pushed deeper into Germany and toward its final, brutal conclusion, Lafayette Poole recovered far from the battlefield he had dominated. The war would end without him returning to combat. Yet for a brief, intense period in 1944, Poole embodied the raw effectiveness of American armored forces at their peak, a tanker whose results spoke louder than any legend, and whose story would remain largely unknown outside military circles for decades. By the spring of 1945, Lafayette G. Poole had become something rare even among hardened armored veterans, a tank commander whose reputation traveled faster than his column. Within the 3rd Armored Division, his name was already spoken with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Outside it, German prisoners were beginning to recognize the white star of American Shermans not just as a symbol of defeat, but as a warning. Poole and his crew had survived what statistics said they should not have survived. They had fought through Normandy, across France, and deep into Germany itself, destroying enemy armor, breaking counterattacks, and holding ground under conditions that routinely annihilated less experienced units. But war has a way of ending legends not with grand finales, but with sudden, indifferent violence. On April 7, 1945, near the German town of Dessau, Poole's war came to an abrupt halt. The region was already collapsing under the weight of Allied advances. German resistance was fragmented but still dangerous, filled with desperate units, hidden anti-tank guns, and Panzerfaust teams willing to die in place. Poole was riding outside his tank, as he often did, standing exposed in the turret hatch to gain better visibility. It was something many veteran tank commanders did, despite the risk. Inside the tank, visibility was poor. Outside, you could see the battlefield as it really was. Poole had survived months of combat this way. On that day, it finally caught up with him. A German machine gun opened fire. One round struck Poole in the head. The bullet did not kill him. In some ways, that made it worse. The wound instantly ended his combat career. Poole collapsed, unconscious, and was evacuated under fire. His crew survived. His tank survived. But, War Daddy, the man who had become synonymous with relentless armored aggression, would never command a tank in combat again. The war would end just weeks later, but for Poole, it was already over. He was 26 years old. In total, Lafayette Poole was officially credited with destroying at least 12 German tanks, over 250 enemy vehicles, and countless artillery pieces, trucks, and fortified positions. Some estimates placed the number higher. Records from the chaos of armored warfare were often incomplete, and many kills were shared or unconfirmed. But even the conservative numbers place him among the most effective American tank aces of the war. What made his record exceptional was not just the destruction, but the survival. Many tank aces did not live long enough to build long careers. Poole did. He fought continuously from Normandy to central Germany and lived through it. Yet when the war ended, there was no parade for Lafayette Poole. He returned home to Texas with permanent brain damage, partial paralysis, and severe cognitive impairment. The bullet that struck him had not killed him, but it had taken much of what made him who he was. The confident, aggressive, instinctive battlefield commander was gone. Poole struggled with memory, speech, and basic tasks. The Army awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. These medals sat quietly on shelves while the man who earned them tried to relearn how to live. Unlike many wartime legends, Poole never sought attention. He never wrote a memoir. He never toured lecture circuits or appeared on television. He did not romanticize his war. He lived quietly, supported by family and veterans' care, fading into obscurity while Hollywood and popular history focused elsewhere. Ironically, his legacy resurfaced decades later in unexpected ways. When the 2014 film Fury was released, audiences were introduced to the character of Don War Daddy Collier, a hardened Sherman tank commander leading a veteran crew across Germany. The parallels were impossible to miss. A relentless commander, a battered tank that survived impossible odds, a crew that stayed alive far longer than statistics predicted. While the filmmakers never officially claimed the character was based solely on Lafayette Poole, historians and armored warfare experts quickly recognized the influence. Poole's story had quietly shaped one of the most realistic portrayals of American tank combat ever put on screen. But even then, his real name remained unknown to most viewers. That is perhaps the most fitting end to his story. Lafayette Poole was never fighting for fame. He was fighting to survive and to keep his crew alive. His philosophy was simple and brutal: strike first, strike hard, never hesitate, and never give the enemy time to recover. In a war where hesitation meant death, that mindset saved lives, his crews, and likely many others. He understood something that textbooks often miss. Tanks were not dueling knights or symbols of industrial might. They were blunt instruments, and survival belonged to those who used them without illusion. Poole also represented the evolution of American armored warfare itself. Early in the war, U.S. tank doctrine was cautious and fragmented. By 1944 and 1945, commanders like Poole were operating with aggressive combined arms tactics, coordinating infantry, artillery, air support, and armor into fast-moving, lethal formations. His success was not accidental. It was the result of experience paid for in blood, mistakes corrected under fire, and an understanding that warfare rewards adaptability more than theory. In the end, Lafayette, War Daddy, Poole did not die in a blaze of glory. He survived the war, carried its scars for the rest of his life, and passed away in 1991 at the age of 72. His name never became widely known, and perhaps that is why his story feels so powerful now. He was not a symbol crafted by propaganda. He was not a myth. He was a man who climbed into a steel box, day after day, drove straight toward the enemy, and refused to break. World War II produced countless heroes. Some were celebrated, Many were forgotten. Lafayette Poole belongs to a rare group whose impact was enormous, whose courage was unquestionable, and whose recognition came far too late. He was not the most famous tanker of the war, but pound for pound, mile for mile, and fight for fight, he may have been the most gangster tanker the U.S. Army ever put on the battlefield.